Okay, we got all the way to the end of chapter 4 last week. Chapter 3 last week, after getting stuck in there for a long time. And to be fair, chapter 3 is one of the most dense chapters theologically in the entire Bible. So we actually did it, which is great. But now we're going into 4, and I'm going to hit the ground running here. What I'm going to do is, prior to this, we had been going verse by verse. We read a verse off, and we would discuss it. Hey guys, come on in. Well, see, now I do need to give an introduction, because this is your first time. Hi guys.
Oh, yeah.
Have a seat wherever. We're good.
We're handing out the merits. So we're handing out the merits.
We're late.
Report here at 5:30 tomorrow for detention.
I've been in school so many years, I had to
He was scared to come here because the whole school setting.
I can't
He was
do
anxiety.
It's okay, we're pretty chill. We've been going through Galatians, and we have gotten all the way through the first 3 chapters, finally. It's taken a long time. But let me see, from someone who's been here for a little while, summarize what the book of Galatians is all about.
Doug?
Well,
You're the preacher's son. You should know this.
I'll call my dad.
It's basically Paul's, you guys know Paul from the Bible, right?
No, I have no idea.
Well, this is hard.
Start from the beginning. What is the Bible?
I don't know how to do this.
Yeah, go back to Genesis.
Paul.
We'll be good.
Who is
Paul
God?
is writing a letter to the Galatians, the church of Galatia, I believe. And it's basically, they kind of fell to some false teachings. They were more or less like, correct me if I'm wrong, but they started doing things that basically Jesus said don't do. I'm sure you could go from
Yeah,
there.
that was pretty close. That was good. Bottom line, and so this is a quick refresher for you guys and fresh for you guys, unless you studied the book before. It's a letter that Paul wrote to a church in the Galatian region. He founded those churches. He went and he spread the gospel there, and a lot of Gentiles, some Jews and a lot of Gentiles accepted Christ. And so the church got started, and after a while, this group came and started telling them, okay, hey, I know you guys have been on into faith and relationship, like Paul told you, like faith in God and relationship with God, but we're going to tell you that you need to be focused all on the Old Testament law. You need to be circumcised, and you need to follow all the Jewish ceremonies, and you need to follow all the special diets, and this and that. You really need to focus on these things instead of those things, or at the very least, these should be your priority over faith and relationship and stuff like that. And so this whole letter is Paul's rebuttal. He's writing a letter to them saying, look guys, here is why you should not be gravitating towards the external law, the Torah is the word for it, over faith, over relationship. And so we've gone through that, and what's cool about a lot of these sections is even if you haven't read any of the prior sections, a lot of them can stand on their own, because he makes the same point so many different ways that you can just kind of pick up any of them and get it. So we're going to start right here at the beginning of chapter 4, and what I'm going to do, the format for tonight, I'm going to be reading through the first 7 verses, or like a chunk of verses that go together, and then we'll be breaking it down kind of piece by piece. And the plan is to go all the way through chapter 4, time allowing. So I'll go ahead and read this for you. If anybody doesn't have a Bible and would like one, I have a few over here. Actually, right now, does anyone want a Bible that doesn't have one? Okay. If you decide you want one, there's multiple versions over there you can grab on the left-hand side of my little bookshelf. But I'm going to go ahead and read this. Paul writes, right at the beginning of chapter 4, he says, I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave. Though he is the owner of everything, but he is under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. Okay, so what Paul's doing here is in chapter 3, he began to appeal to the Galatians, saying, look, we're friends. I taught you this stuff. I taught you that faith and relationship were the most important thing when it comes to this whole religion thing. So please turn away from all these external law focus. And what he's going to do is he's going to continue that and introduce an analogy, a slavery and an heir analogy. So this heir thing, here's what he says. He says the heir. And so we get the concept of an heir, right? Let's say a child heir to an estate. The child, technically, it's his, right? I mean, he's the heir. It's his. It will be his as soon as he's old enough to manage it. But he's a kid. And so he's not mature enough. He's not old enough to manage it. And so his father kind of sets restrictions over him or puts a guardian over him to kind of help him make the decisions or guide him along until he can manage it on his own. We get that idea. So that's not foreign to us, but then Paul says this. He says, in the same way we also. In other words, we're exactly the same way as an heir. We're exactly the same as an heir. But here's where it gets tricky, and I'll explain what all this means in a second. He says, in the same way, when we were children, we were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. So just to throw out a discussion here, if you've read this prior, what do you think elementary principles of the world refers to?
The law. The law.
That's a really good observation. Think? Any other opinions? Elementary principles of the world. Yeah, I think Kim got really close right off the top. Because he says, in the same way, like we're the exact same as the heir, okay? The heir's not old enough to handle it all on his own, so he's under guardians. And in that way, he's kind of like a slave. He's under someone who's kind of guiding him along and telling him what to do until he can be trusted with it on his own. And he says, and we were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world in the same way that the heir is enslaved. And so, given this, this is where I think, Kim, you would probably say that you figured that out based on the context and based on the general idea of Paul's point. But this has been interpreted by a lot of people to mean sin and like the way the world works, like the basic way the world works. If you take the sentence by itself, that seems like what it would mean. But then if you take the context in general, he says we're enslaved to those things in the same way that the heir was enslaved. And so taking that, and this is where I think you got your answer there. Taking that, I think it's best we understand elementary principles of the world as meaning something close to this. Rudimentary religious ideas. Rudimentary religious ideas. So back in chapter 3, Paul made a point, and I'll go ahead and read it off to you. He said this: before faith came, we were held captive under the law. Before faith came, we were held captive under the law, imprisoned until the coming faith would be revealed. So then the law was our guardian until Christ came, in order that we could be justified by faith. So over and over and over again throughout this book, he's been saying, look, okay, you guys, you've experienced faith over here, okay? You've experienced faith. The Galatians they're over here. That's the Galatians. They've experienced this, and they're good. Everything's great. And then someone comes along and tells them, okay, no, you should be focused on the law and doing all these things externally to buy your way into God's good graces, okay? Buy your way into heaven or whatever else. Now the Galatians have experienced faith, and by faith, Paul always means relational faith. It's like the kind of faith a husband has in a wife has in her husband, a friend has in a friend. You can only have faith when you know. So it's all about relationship. So the Galatians have experienced that, and someone tells them they should do this, so now they've gone back to this, and this has become like secondary. And Paul's saying, look, no, you're the other way around. The Jews started off over here with these basic ideas, because when the Israelites were young, they couldn't be, like when they were young as a nation, they couldn't be trusted with the fullness of faith. They were falling apart at the seams, so they had like kind of a heavy-handed approach to it. But now we've graduated to faith, is what he said. Look, before we were under imprisonment by the law, but now Christ has come and we've been delivered into a faith system. So you guys are you're going the wrong way. You've got it mixed up here. This is what he says. In the same way, we used to be enslaved to the principles, elementary principles of the world, enslaved to those basic religious ideas. They were, it's the stuff we're talking about, all the ceremonies that the Jews would constantly do, all of the constant festivals, and they would have multiple festivals a month that they were required. It was a mandatory thing for them to do in their culture according to the law. The special diets and circumcision and all this stuff. Those things were there, Paul's saying, as guardians. They were there as guardians, like the guardian is set over the heir, because he's too young to handle the full thing at that point. But he's saying, look, we're not kids anymore. Christ has come and delivered us into something better. He's saying, look, we're no longer kids, we're no longer slaves, we're sons, we're heirs. That's a pretty powerful language. He says, look, we're no longer under the basic system. God gave the Israelites the law and the basic way of doing things, and we're no longer being treated like children. We're no longer being treated like slaves or servants. We're sons, heirs. And obviously there's a big difference there, right? You treat the servant very differently than you treat the son, the heir to the estate. Yeah, Kim.
You said that this was chronologically the first epistle in the New Testament, or at least of Paul, right?
Yes.
Okay, because I had noticed, and I didn't realize until we actually started studying this, that throughout the New Testament, he talks about this concept of adoption into sonship. And I kind of halfway got that, but I didn't really get it until analyzing this analogy, and so he goes back and touches on that multiple times in his later letters.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can view this letter, because a lot of other letters aren't as pointed as this one is. So if you were to read Ephesians or Colossians, it's kind of a smorgasbord of, okay, you should do this, and you should do this. And he's giving them a whole lot of advice to cover this whole range of issues. A lot of letters are like that. Galatians is 100%, there's one issue that I got to fix immediately. And so this is kind of the first and the heaviest theological punch Paul gives out of all his letters. So and a lot of his other letters are going to be repeating some of the things you read in here. This one in Romans kind of stand as the archetypes theologically for really most of the New Testament. A lot of our theology, when we understand about, everything I'm reading off here, this understanding of the law and moving forward into faith, this is where we get it. Paul's words right here. But yeah, it's a really cool difference. The idea of being a son of God instead of a servant of God. And clearly, in senses, we are servants of God, right? But to say with confidence that I am a son or a daughter of God, prior to the coming of Christ, there was a very strong feeling like you shouldn't take that liberty. You know what I mean? It's presumptuous. We're so far, we are the servants, and we are to do the law and to follow, and this is our place. But Christ came and showed, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. Sons and daughters, heirs of the kingdom, which is really cool. I love the picture that Paul paints it. We've moved forward from the basic concepts into faith, into relationship with God, which is awesome. And Jesus says a really similar thing, actually, in John chapter 15. He says, "No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends." It's, once again, really cool. And that's the difference between the way the Israelites approached God, according to the law system in the Old Testament, to what we know, what we begin to experience in the New Testament and continue to experience today. Direct relationship and access to communication with God. And that's why the coming of Christ is such a big deal. This is what he says. "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son to redeem those who were under the law, so we might receive adoption as sons." And then Paul kind of hits a crescendo. He loves to do this. He makes a point, and then he gets excited about it. And then he starts building it up, and he says, "And God has sent the Spirit into our hearts, crying, 'Abba, Father, you're no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir.'" Which is just great. I love this moment. And you can see really clearly, Paul's trying to make a point. He's using very powerful language, an heir and a son. It's very positive. And then you have a slave and imprisoned, and these very negative words. And he's trying to show the Galatians, look, the law that you're trying to go back to is you're not moving forward. You're going to an inferior way of relating with God. You're taking the fullness out of the picture and going back to the basic shell again. And so he's making, why would you want to be a slave as opposed to an heir? Like, what reason would you have for wanting that over this? And that's going to continue to kind of be his point as we move on to the next couple of verses. Any thoughts or observations before we move on from this little section here? No? Okay. He's going to kind of keep a similar tone in the next 4 verses or so. But he says, look, formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now that you've come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I'm afraid I may have labored over you in vain. And so as with every section in this book, there's a load of things that you could trip over and go, what the world is he talking about? But if you take it piece by piece and interpret them piece by piece, it's not that hard. And then combining them all together, his message it's very straightforward. You can kind of summarize what he's saying here in a sentence. This is what he's saying, bottom line. Look, why return to old dead religion when you've experienced relationship with God? That's the thrust of his statement in these few verses. Why go back to that when you've experienced the fullness and the richness of what you were designed for in relationship with God? He said, look, before you didn't know God, you were under the slavery that comes from religion and religion alone. Because religion with no substance is worthless, okay? Just to make that clear. It's slavery, it's worthless. He says, and before you experienced relationship, before you had the knowledge, the relationship with God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. He says, just like, and so he's speaking to both Jews and Gentiles. So for some hearing this, that means the Torah and the law alone. And for some hearing that means the pagan gods they worshipped before they became Christians, because the Gentiles worshipped many pagan gods. He says, before you were enslaved to those who by nature are not gods, whether the pagan gods or the worthless religions or the Torah alone, whatever it is. But now that you have come to know God, or rather be known by God, how can you turn back again to that worthless stuff? How can you turn back to slavery again? And so what's cool here is that word, the word know, and this is everyone's favorite Greek word to talk about, but whatever. That's the Greek word there in the text, gnosko. And what it refers to, it means to know, but more than just our English word know, it means experiential knowledge. So I can tell you 100 stats about Michael Jordan's career, but I can't say I gnosko Michael Jordan. I haven't met him. I don't know the guy. Okay, but like a husband knows his wife, like a best friend knows his best friend, whatever it is. That's what gnosko is. Real, experiential knowledge. And he says, look, now that you have come to gnosko God, have real experiential relationship, or rather be gnoskoed by God, how can you turn back from that into just religion again? These worthless elementary principles. How can you turn from the real stuff to the basic external actions? How can you prioritize circumcision and diets and whatever else over this? And there's really a strong feeling of confusion in Paul's tone here, and you're going to see that even more in just a moment. Here's something that could be interpreted as strange. He says, you observe days and months and seasons and years. Any guesses what he's saying? Some people will read stuff like that and they go, what is wrong with Paul? He's just saying a bunch of random stuff. But what is he saying? Yeah, he's talking about the Jewish calendar. Okay? He says a very, very similar thing in Galatians. He said, you observe days and months and seasons and years. Just like the Jews, every particular day would have a certain meaning, and the certain festivals, and watching the certain years as they go on. He's basically saying, look, you've turned back to all of this external stuff as your focus. I'm afraid that the work that I spent trying to help you into a relationship with God may have been in vain. Make sense? This is a fairly quick little section, but it's straightforward. He says, how can you go back on real relationship with God into worthless religion? So here's a question. Is this something that we do today? Yeah. Yeah, I think it is. And why? Why is it that we like to simplify Christianity into, well, going to church on Sunday morning, or praying before a meal, or trying to be a good person, leaving out the relationship with God part?
I think it has to do with pride, because it's an easy metric to say, I do this and they don't do that, so I'm closer to God or something.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think that, and along with that, it's kind of like it takes a conscious effort to be in a relationship with anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with God, it takes more of a conscious effort because He's not right in front of us. He's harder to talk to in that way. But I think it takes conscious effort, and without conscious effort, we just kind of go through motions, kind of make it a schedule thing. Just go to church on Sunday.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Any relationship, as anyone who's been in any relationship before would know, it takes effort. It's hard. Marriage is tough. It's very worthwhile, of course, but it takes effort. You have to work. And like you said, God's not right there. So it's easy to forget that He's not right there. I mean, He is, but we can't physically see Him. And furthermore, a relationship is a whole lot more real and impactful than religion.
Mm-hmm.
And it necessitates a lot more life change. When you're in an active relationship with God, you're constantly going to be hit with things that you are not up to snuff on. Not because God's constantly telling you, here's what you're not up to snuff on, but because you're going to become painfully aware of how selfish you are, to put it broadly. So it's a lot more... What's that?
The more you know, the more you know you don't know.
Yeah, basically. And I think sometimes it's a lot easier for us to just take the religion and the simple acts and the rote, as opposed to the living and the dynamic relationship. It's a lot harder, So it's always very important that we don't take a book like this or anything in the Bible as let me try to understand this so that I can say I understand Galatians. But rather to take the issues that were being dealt with there and realize, first of all, that 2,000 years is nowhere near enough time for humans to have evolved to the point that we don't struggle with the same garbage we've been struggling with since the inception of mankind. There's nothing new under the sun, as the author of Ecclesiastes so sarcastically penned. Bottom line is, everything you read in here is nothing that you're not safe from. Nothing that you are safe from. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Every issue, all of it is something that we can potentially be vulnerable to. And so especially in relationship with God, we have to be vigilant in pursuing that, just like a marriage or a relationship with another person or whatever else. It's on the same level, but even more intense. So let's, if there's no more questions here, let's go ahead and switch over to the next section. And this is a little bit lengthier. I've split it in two, so we'll look at the first 5 verses here. But in this section, you're going to see Paul in full-on perplexion mode. He's confused, and he's expressing his confusion. Basically saying, look, guys, we know each other. I know you guys. You know me. What is happening here? Why is this happening? Here's what he says. Brothers, I entreat you, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You did me no wrong. You know it was because of a bodily ailment that I preached the gospel to you at first. Though my condition was a trial to you, you did not scorn or despise me, but received me as an angel of God, as Jesus Christ. What then has become of your blessedness? For I testify to you that if possible, you would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me. Have I then become your enemy by telling you the truth? Bottom line, he's saying, look, you guys, we got along. We got along. I preached the gospel to you, and you guys received me, and you blessed me, and you cared for me, and we were friends. We were tight. And so what changed? Because apparently they're treating him as the enemy now. What changed? You guys would go to any lengths to help me out. And so now what? Now I'm the enemy because I'm simply telling you what is true about the gospel? It's very simple. He says, what's interesting here is he implies that it was a bodily ailment that actually gave him the occasion to preach the gospel to them. Paul, for those of you who don't know or don't remember, Paul founded the church in Galatia during his first missionary journey. He was touring parts of the world that hadn't received the gospel yet and spreading the word of Jesus Christ. And apparently, he was spreading it through these regions in Galatia, and he says a bodily ailment kind of kept him there.
That wasn't when he was stoned, was it?
That was immediately afterwards. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He experienced a lot of persecution in and out of Galatia. He was stoned and chased out, and riots, and all kinds of savory things. But bottom line, it seems like that bodily ailment kept him there for a little bit longer than he expected and gave him the opportunity to more fully disciple them. And he said, look, you received me so graciously. Why are you treating me like this now? And so that really, there's nothing too tough to chew on here. But then he goes on with the section, more expressing his perplexion. He says, they make much of you, but for no good purpose. They want to shut you out, that you may make much of them. It is always good to be made much of for a good purpose, and not only when I am present with you, my little children, for whom I am again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone, for I am perplexed about you. And so there's some weird phrasing here, but really there's nothing too difficult. Basically saying, look, these men they is these people who've been telling them the laws should be their priority. He said these men, the word here is affectare, which is basically to zealously strive after, or to earnestly desire. So they're basically saying, look, they're courting you. They're telling you all these good things. They're trying to pull you over to them, but not for a good purpose. They want to shut you out. In other words, kind of keep you isolated from any other teaching or any other opinion, that you would come and join them. Kind of align yourselves with their opinion. And then he goes on a little side point. He's like, look, there's no problem with somebody trying to pull you over to their side. There's no problem with someone trying to convince you of something. And not just me. Not just me. And then he gets segues. So you might as well put a big line right here. And he goes, my little children. Oh, and by the way, I really, really care about you guys. By the way, for you guys, I'm still in the anguish of childbirth until Christ has formed you. In other words, I'm praying and I'm anguishing that you guys will be completed in your discipleship. So Paul is classically sidetracked. He says, not only am I present with my little children, no, and I really, really care with you. And he says, I wish I was there. I wish we could talk this out because I'm really confused. I don't get it. I don't get how you guys could be doing something so dumb. Any questions about this?
Why would a man use the anguish of childbirth?
2,000 years of cultural writing difference. Paul does this actually multiple times. He seems to favor the analogy because in Romans...
he was never married or nothing, right?
No. Nope, definitely never married. Peter may have been, but not Paul.
Paul was actually a woman?
Yeah, maybe... Polly.
Like we had this, I guess it was something we talked about in another topic before, but we had talked about how, basically the institution of family was formed following original sin, and it, may have been to show us just, what God goes through for us for us to go through that for our children. And so even if he doesn't, can't relate to the physical pain of childbirth, he can say, look, I'm so torn up that you guys are making dumb mistakes, just like a parent would be for their child.
Yeah, basically. And look, basically you could say, for I am in anguish until Christ is formed in you. Because he's saying, the anguish of childbirth basically means very great anguish. He's like, I'm in great, great anguish until Christ is formed in you. He's basically saying, look, this is how much I care about you. I really and genuinely care about your spiritual state and your relationships with God. And I wish I could be there with you. And so now we're going to move into the last section of chapter 4. We're making good time, but this is a not weird, but potentially difficult section. And actually, I really like it. Paul gets really creative here.
I'm going to do a smaller font. We're in trouble.
Yeah, I know. This isn't even the whole section. I left out like 3 verses. Wait, 3?
Yeah, 28.
Yep. Well, 4, 5, 4. Okay, what Paul is going to do here is he's going to give a big old allegory, a rabbinical style allegory, because Paul was a Pharisee, he was a classically trained rabbi, and all this good stuff. What he's going to do here is, we've had this big section in which Paul gets really personal with the Galatians. He's saying, guys, why would you do this? Look, we know each other. Why would you turn all over to this stuff and that stuff, okay? But in chapter 3, the whole thing was attacking the view. He's taking the view that these men are trying to teach the Galatians and say, come to the law. The law is what's really important. And in chapter 3, that's all he did was he just basically showed them how that is a flawed idea. It's a flawed opinion that God prioritizes the law over relationship and faith. And so he's going to jump right back into this here. And you can tell him change his tone right from the beginning. Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? In other words, he's saying, look, I'm about to go into the Old Testament and show you that you are wrong. I'm going to prove to you, using your own rules, that you're wrong. He's been doing this throughout the whole book. So he's going to try to show the Galatians that the view is off. They have no business going to it. It's clearly wrong. I thought there was someone outside. But he's going to use what he calls allegory. And really, it's just finding a really clever parallel to illustrate a point. I wouldn't say he interprets the section allegorically, but we'll see what he says. I'll go ahead and read through this all the way through to the very end, and then we'll look at it, and we're going to have plenty of time to it, I believe. Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born through promise. Now this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are 2 covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. She's Hagar. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother. For it is written, rejoice, O barren one who does not bear, break forth and cry aloud, you who are not in labor. For the children of the desolate one will be more than those of the one who has a husband. Now you, brothers, like Isaac, are children of promise. But just as at that time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so also it is now. But what does the Scripture say? Cast out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. So, brothers, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman. So that's a lot of words and a lot of potential to get really confused. But it's okay, because we're going to go through this together, and it actually makes a lot of sense. He's giving a really clear point. Once again, bottom line, he's saying, look, guys, I'm going to go into the Old Testament, and I'm going to show you why you're wrong, using a whole other way of doing it. Then he says, Abraham had 2 sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. Do you guys, how familiar are you with the circumstances surrounding Abraham's 2 sons? I'll give you the SparkNotes version. God promised Abraham, the big promise. He said, I'm going to give you a son, and I'm going to make that son into an incredibly mighty nation. And with that nation, I will bless the entire earth. That's like the beginning promise for the Israelites' existence. Abraham had trouble believing this because he was very old, and his wife, Sarah, was also very old. Too old to have children. And so Abraham goes back and forth, but finally says Abraham believed God, which is all well and true, or all well and good. But after some time passed and no son showed up, Abraham started getting a little worried. And finally he said, you know what, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And so, as was very common in this day, he took one of the slave women, and he slept with her, and she became pregnant. She had a son for him. The son's name was Ishmael. Now, right around the same time, Abraham's wife, Sarah, the one who was barren and too old to have children, got pregnant. And she had a son named Isaac. Now, it's Isaac that had the son named Jacob, who was also known as Israel, who was the father of Israel. And so we know that it was Isaac who became the nation of Israel. But here's what he says. Abraham had two sons, one by a slave and one by a free, but the son of the slave was born according to the flesh. What does that mean?
He did it by himself.
He did it by his power, by his ability. He said, I'm going to make this happen. While the son of the free woman, Sarah, was born through promise. What does that mean?
God made it happen.
God made it happen. It was born through faith in the promise of God. So are you seeing how this might apply so far? Through the whole thing, the whole book, Paul has been equating the law with the flesh. Why? Because the law represents trying to get in God's good graces on your own ability. I can do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do all these things, and then God must approve of me because I've met all this criteria. Whereas faith says, I'm walking in relationship with you. And there's nothing I can do to earn my place in that because that's what relationship is. Make sense? And so Paul is going to make a point here. The son of the slave was born according to the flesh. Abraham said, I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to do it, just like the law. And the son of the free woman, Isaac, was born through the promise. He says this may be interpreted allegorically. In other words, I'm going to find a neat little parallel to prove my point. The women are two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai. What does that mean?
Mosaic law.
Yeah, why is Mount Sinai mentioned at all?
That's where Moses came down from when he had the law.
That's right. When you talk about the law in the Old Testament, it's when Moses went up on Mount Sinai and he came down with the tablets. He came down with the law to give to the people. And he says, look, the slave woman who had the son who was born according to the effort of Abraham, according to the flesh, said she is representative of the covenant of Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. She's Hagar. Hagar is Mount Sinai, and she corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she's in slavery with her children. In other words, look, the way the Jews are now, they're obsessed with the law. They're obsessed with the flesh. They're obsessed with trying to do it themselves. And they correspond to the children born in slavery. He says, but the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother. In other words, the true Jerusalem is free. And that's the one we'll get to eventually. And she is our mother. In other words, Paul and the Galatians, the Christians. She is our mother. We're children of the free, children of the promise, children of faith and relationship. And then he has a quote here from Isaiah 54. Where he basically says, rejoice, O barren one, Sarah, who does not bear. And this isn't referring to Sarah. This is just a quote that he takes out of context and applies it, which people in the Bible can do if they want. Rejoice, O barren one, Sarah, who does not bear. Break forth and cry aloud, you who are not in labor. For the children of the desolate one, that's her, will be more than those of the one who has a husband. Hagar didn't have a husband, but that's representative of Hagar. That's the basic point he's making. And then finally, to round off his point completely, he says this, you, brothers, are like Isaac, the children of promise. In other words, we, the Christians, the Galatians, we are the children of promise. But just as at that time, he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so also it is now. What in the world is he talking about?
Judaizers saying you're not doing it right.
Yeah. Look, way back in Genesis chapter 21, Ishmael mocked Isaac, threateningly mocked him. And so this is what he's referring to with persecution. The child who was born according to the flesh, Ishmael, mocked him who was born according to the Spirit, Isaac. And it's the same way now. The Judaizers, those people who care all about the law, those children of slavery now, the Jews as it is now, or the Judaizers, whoever it is, they're persecuting those who care about relationship and who care about faith now. They're persecuting the Christians, which is what happened. But what does the Scripture say? And right here, he's going to give the key. In other words, what does God care about? Cast out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. In other words, the whole point of that thing was Abraham messed up when he tried to do it of his own power. When he crossed the line and no longer believed by faith in the promise of God. In other words, when he left the relational side and said, I'm going to make it happen. I will make the promise happen. He goofed. He goofed up. This is what God said. Look, you don't have to kill them or anything, but you need to be separated from that now, moving forward. And then he took care of Hagar and Ishmael in the wilderness and made them a nation as well. But bottom line is, look, very clearly, where would you say what God cares about would lie? Does God care about the efforts that Abraham did in the flesh, or does he prefer the promise? And very clearly, God cares about the promise. God cares about the faith and the relationship. And he said, so, brothers, we are not the children of the slave, but of the free woman. So he's making this point really clearly. We don't belong over here anymore. It is inferior, it is old, it is rudimentary, it is basic, we've moved on, and it's slavery. We're children of the free. We're in faith and relationship and fullness now. Any questions about that section? Any questions about the whole chapter? Because that's the end.
I feel like I had a little bit of that.
That was it? End of the chapter at the book. We have 2 more chapters. Yeah. Although chapter 6.
Yeah.
Paul usually, he'll always have at least one sentence, but usually like almost the whole chapter will be dedicated to, and tell so-and-so hi for me, and remember to greet the brothers around the churches around you, and remember to do this, and always remember to take the offering for the poor, and this is what it says postscript, that's what that means. Yeah, exactly. It's Paul's, it's what he'll do. But we'll always have that before we end, but that brings us really close to the ending, because we have one more major section in all of chapter 5, and then a few verses at the beginning of chapter 6, and that'll be it. Thoughts about the whole chapter? No? Okay. Next week, we are, rain or shine, going to go all the way through chapter 5. Thanks, guys.